Okay, well, let's go ahead and just introduce ourselves before we get into it here. My name is Jessica Munger. I'm Move to Amends Program Director, and I'm here with Jason.
Hello, as Jessica said, I'm Jason. I'm on the National Board of Directors, and I'm happy to be on this call.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have this bird dogging conversation, which we've been having for a couple months as an organization, but this webinar will take us kind of to the next step. So hopefully you can all hear us okay. We have some tips here in case you need some help. Mostly we will be kind of doing presentation stuff, but if you need any help, you can contact the Zoom experts who can help you work it out. There will also be a recording of this that we'll send out after the webinar, so you can have it that way too. Oh, and I should say there's a chat bar that you can access down at the bottom, and you can raise your hand that way as well. So there's going to be some parts of this that are participatory, so please feel free to make use of the tools and communicate with us. Okay, so the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about bird dogging. What is it? Do a little bit of the foundations that we're working with when we talk about bird dogging, what makes it good or bad. We're going to talk a little bit about optics specifically, what makes it good or bad. We'll do some questions and make sure that you're feeling comfortable with the information we presented, and then go over some examples, and we'll do a group practice with you participating, creating questions, and thinking about the things we've presented, and then we will wrap up. And I should just say that if you're brand new to bird dogging, that's great. This is a good place for you. And also if you have done it before and are just looking to refine it a little bit better and figure out how to make it the best that it could be, this is also a good place for you to be. So it's good for beginners and experienced bird doggers. Okay.
Maybe go back one.
Did I skip one? Okay, thanks. My computer's a little tired, so sorry about that. One more. There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
So as Jessica said, that this webinar is about bird dogging. And for this webinar, we're going to cover bird dogging in the sense, I know a lot of people may have different definitions and different actions that they tie to bird dogging. So specifically on this webinar, we're talking about bird dogging that is non-disruptive, asking a question, et cetera, you know, trying to get your question in front of a candidate. And so to define bird dogging, we're saying what bird dogging is to follow, watch carefully, or investigate. When used in a political context, the term refers to activists who seek out candidates, pin them down with specific questions or information, and retrieve their views. So that's what we're going to be, that's what we mean when we were talking about bird dogging tonight on this call.
Okay, so why is this tactic important? This tactic is something that is really useful to have in our tool belt as activists and organizers. It helps us in a lot of different ways, and it shouldn't stand on its own, but it's a really important one that we should be utilizing right now as Move to Amend, and we'll talk about why we're in a good position to use it. So bird dogging allows us to do a lot of education, which is, of course, a really important part of what we're doing. So it allows us to educate the public, the audience around us, when we go to an event and bird dog a candidate. It also allows us to educate candidates, because a lot of times they're dealing with a lot of different issues, and sometimes something just hasn't crossed their mind before. And so that's our job as organizers, to make sure that people know what our issue is and why it's important. It also allows us to force politicians to take a position. As we all know, they're really good at wiggling their way out of directly answering questions. But in bird dogging, it gives us an opportunity, if we can craft our question in an effective way, to make them say something definite. And so that's the goal when we're trying to pin them down on a position. It helps us to further the We the People amendment, specifically when we use it as move to amend, because it allows us to sometimes use what comes out of a bird dogging experience as leverage to make a politician or candidate take action. So whether that's co-sponsoring the We the People amendment, introducing it, or being ready to act on it when they come into office if they're running for office at the time. It's also a practice in democracy and accountability. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. But we like to think of democracy as something that we do. And so it's a really good practice in communicating and being in public political events and practicing those skills. So on that note, Move to Amend's mission is to, we're a coalition of hundreds of organizations and even more individuals who are committed to building social and economic justice, ending corporate rule, and building a vibrant democracy that is accountable to people and not just billionaires and their corporations. And so it's much bigger actually than just passing the We the People amendment. And so we have to have skills and analysis that allows us to see a much bigger picture, which is how are we getting to win the world that we want and deserve, which is a just, sustainable, and fully democratic society. So how do we get there? Our goals are, of course, to pass the We the People amendment to make clear that artificial entities such as corporations should not have constitutional rights and that money is not speech. So that's, of course, the tactic that we're all really familiar with, that we're working towards in a very concrete way. But we also have a goal to provoke discussion and organizing about how to make real the promise of the American democracy through constitutional renewal. So as I said, it's much bigger than just passing an amendment, but it's actually to think about constitutional renewal as a tactic to bring about this more just and democratic world. So Move to Amend has always had a really strong commitment to our founding principles and values. Ever since we started doing this work, we've made a commitment to ourselves and to those that we work with and our volunteers that we will be rooted in these principles, because we believe that the way we go about doing something is also important. And so those principles from the beginning have included anti-oppression and solidarity organizing. So that means that we recognize the networks of oppression that are built to divide us, and we work actively to negate those and to work in spite of them, and to engage in solidarity organizing, which means that we work with groups who are dealing with issues that are created by corporate rule without the ask of reciprocity, but to be there for those who are doing good work as well. We have a dedication to coalition and movement building. So similarly, we know that we can't do this ourselves and that it's going to take a large, broad people's movement in order to win. And so we've always had a dedication to being a coalition and working on movement building primarily above other things. We also, of course, are dedicated to grassroots organizing. You all know this because you're a part of it, probably. So we believe that power comes from the bottom up and not from the top down. And so our priorities and energy have gone into building the grassroots at a local level and building power there in order to organize for power as we move forward. We also have a dedication to political education, which means that we prioritize learning about past movements, about these oppressions that I've referenced earlier and how all of that works, what we can take away from past movements, tactics, strategy, analysis, to make sure that we are as well educated as we can always. And then, of course, we have a dedication to political and economic independence. That means that we're not connected to any parties or politicians. We operate independent of all of that. We don't take money from people like that or parties or even, large foundations or anything like that who often have political agendas. So that allows us to operate in a way that we feel is just and is without agenda from those who give us a lot of money.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And now with the recognition, that's a lot. I mean, we just put a lot in front of us around the missions, the values, and the goals of Move to Amend. So we're going to take a moment to kind of tease out one of those elements and really put a framework around it, because we feel that it's critical, and it's so important to the work that we do that it was, if you remember in the last slide of the principles of value, it was the #1 item listed, and that's working through an anti-oppression framework. So we're gonna define what we mean by anti-oppression framework here, or anti-oppression, and then work towards how does that become a framework in our organizing, specifically for this call for bird dogging. So anti-oppression is to acknowledge, or the anti-oppression framework is to acknowledge oppressions in societies, economies, cultures, and groups, and to remove or negate the influence of those oppressions. So anti-oppression is obviously the opposite of oppression, but it's actually the work that we need to do. It's the foundation. The framework means that it's in everything that we do, that we recognize the systems of oppressions, working against our collective power and liberation, and we work towards dismantling them at every step of the way in what we organize and what we're doing. So it can look at specifically going after racism. It can look specifically at going after one of the anti-oppression lenses. But it can also look at how do we organize, what is our foundation that our values are built on. And so to begin to look at that and to begin to build that framework, we need to understand what anti-oppression lenses are. And we define it as that there's 6 main lenses to anti-oppression, and that's racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, ageism, and class oppression. And so with these lenses, this allows us to recognize those systems of oppression, to take notice, to step back and go asking ourselves, and whatever we're doing, whether it's our daily lives or organizing, allows us to step back and go, how am I contributing to the systemic or non-systemic ism that's happening, sexism, racism, classism, and then what do I need to do to move past that, to correct that, so we are actually bringing everyone along with us in this work towards the We the People amendment. You want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, sorry, my computer's a little
Is that right?
lag. Too far ahead. Okay, so when we're talking about bird dogging within the anti-oppression framework, what does that mean? That has to do with how we show up in a space when we're engaging in any sort of action, and specifically here talking about engaging in a bird dogging action. So whenever we step into any space, we know that there are dynamics present in the room that have to do with oppression, power, and privilege. So when we step into create a bird dogging action or to plan to do that, we should be thinking about those dynamics and trying to figure out how to create the plan in a way that is taking those things into account. So some of the questions we want to ask are, who am I? Who are we doing this action? Who is hosting? Whose space is it? Who are we talking to? Who's the candidate? Who are all the people involved? And how, as Jason was saying, do we build this story without reinforcing those oppressive dynamics? So basically, how do we show up when we come to do something like this?
Before we move on to the next slide, can we go back 1 second? I just want to tease out the questions of who am I? who are we, and really tease it out to how's that question relevant to or organizing, or bird dogging, or how's that even asking who I am related to challenging oppressions. It's like if you're in a space of organizing for like doing a bird dogging campaign, and we're asking ourselves this question of who am I and who are we, the people organizing. You can step back and ask the questions like, are we predominantly white men in this group? Are we predominantly white women, or are we a mixed group? And what does that mean? What power dynamics are inherent with that? What stories and assumptions do people already create around who I am in the framework of oppression? And then that you can ask that question, then you can then identify as like, well, how do I counter that oppression in moving forward, or how I show up to be able to do this work? And then that's what I think is where we're going next, is looking at how I show up, or how we show up in this action, is defined as optics. And optics, as you can see on the screen, is the way that something looks to an outsider, especially concerning political actions. And it's really important for optics to be considered from the groundwork, from the framework of anti-oppression, from the anti-oppression framework. And because if we're not perceived well, how do you think our actions are going to be received by the public, or by the politician, or the person that we're trying to bird dog? I want to take a moment and open up a little bit here to people on the call, and see what you think, why you think optics matters in terms of organizing for Bird Dog. So if you have a comment that you want to say, to answer the question, why does optics matter? You can raise your hand, and I'm not sure how you raise your hand.
I think when you go down to the participants tab at the bottom, there should be options to raise, or you can type it in the chat bar as well.
Yeah, you can do that.
So I'm just going to go back to the definition of optics so we can remember for a second the way something looks to an outsider. So why does this matter when we're talking about organizing bird dogging?
I think we have Tom, he has his hand up. I don't know if you're on mute.
Is he unmuted on our side?
I can't tell.
If you click over in participants, it should show an option to.
Yeah, that doesn't work on this side. So while we're trying to figure out Tom, let's see if we can get Mark. He also has his hand up. Mark, can we hear you? You may be on mute. And if check to see if you're on mute, if you're on the computer, if you scroll down to the bottom left-hand side, there should be, of your screen, there should be a little microphone. And if you're mute, it might have a red dot on it.
Okay, Mark. Yeah, you should be able to talk now.
Okay, great. I think it matters because we need to be taken seriously enough to get a hearing, right? You need to be recognized that, there'd be some value in what you're asking, and to, be able to get even entered, get that entry point.
Totally.
Excellent. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, let's try Tom now.
He's still, Mike is on mute.
Let's see. Tom, looks like you might be on your side. Okay.
Let's try the other Mark Harding.
Hi, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, as they say in show business, image, or even in politics, image is everything. Not that it truly is, but in terms of being effective, if you're going to communicate, then it's critical that optics are a very big part of communicating. And so the impression that we give is also going to impact the answer that we receive. If we are open, if we are sincere, if we show compassion, if we have genuine concerns about an issue and we can frame that issue well, that makes all the difference in the world as opposed to someone who doesn't do those things. And we're not just talking to the politician at that point, we're talking to everyone present who's able to hear or see what we're doing. So we're not just educating, as you said earlier, the politician, but we're educating every person that's within sight or earshot of what we're doing. So
Absolutely.
Before we go to another call, there are people who are writing in the chat, so I want to represent what they're saying real quick before we bring another voice in. So we have Tom actually put in the chat saying you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So it's important for that. Tina put it's important for clear messaging. Nick said people become defensive and closed if they feel attacked. And Max says it can preserve a clear I can't say it, perspective, thank you, of the interaction. So that's what the chat room says, and let's see if we can get Patricia, I can't talk, I'm getting tongue-tied.
All right.
You might be on mute, Patricia.
Okay. Why don't you?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. I was just saying that if we when we present ourselves in a way in the optics in a good way, we present ourselves well, then people will take us serious. They would think, they would stop and say, hey, yes, I think I want to hear this, because they are really talking about something that matters.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. You all get it. Seems like that's exactly right. Okay.
Great.
Anything else in the chat that we should read before we move on?
I'm not seeing it right now, but I'll keep an eye on. Do you want me to do this one, or you want to set it up?
You go ahead.
All right. So we're gonna have a little fun here, and this is also again audience participation. And thank you for your patience with us playing with the mute and getting there. We have a lot of time, so we can slow down and have fun together with this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a series of videos, and we're just going to watch them together, and then have space to answer the question: good optics or bad optics? And we need like game show music. So we're going to watch this first video without commentary, and then we'll open it up and say, is this good optics or bad optics?
All right, so be patient with me while I try to start this video, and I don't know what the sound is going to be like, so you might need to adjust, so fair warning. Oops.
That's the wrong one. You're giving away our secrets.
Okay, let's make this, there we go.
On implementation of your first big idea on the gender pay gap, not everyone works for a corporation.
Yes.
And a big,
Hello. Hi. What's the minute, sir?
President a few minutes ago, asking for your attention to a much bigger idea.
As you can see, this was a protester hauled off by security as Kamala Harris was speaking.
So the same process, raise your hand and we'll bring you forward. Good optics or bad optics? Looks like we have Tom with his hand up now.
Okay, let's see. Sorry, let me be back here. Tom. All right, Tom. Go ahead.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Oh, yeah, no, that was pretty bad. That was pretty bad, I think. Yeah, couldn't get much worse than that.
Yes.
We have one vote for bad.
One vote for bad.
Let's bring in Patricia Day again. She has her hand up. Good optics or bad optics, Patricia?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that was bad optics. Pretty bad.
That's what we call
You
cringy.
started out easy.
Awesome. So
Right.
let's take one more. Stanley, let's see if we can get you your mic open and see if what you think about it. Was this good optics or bad optics?
Unmute. Oh, well, maybe I did that. Okay, so it was a bad optics because not only did the protester disrupt the program, but he didn't get a message across.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't serve his own purpose. He just was disruptive. And that didn't do the audience, us, who were watching this event, any good at all. So he didn't get through to us. He didn't do anything for the speakers, and he didn't do anything for himself.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to reinforce everything that was said, and I think everybody's here. Wait, I want to make sure I get the chat. One chat here says that people who are not familiar with the cause will view all supporters as crazy and immediately tune them out, all their supporters out. So obviously, when bad optics are bad, we see the ripple effects that it creates. So as you can see this video here, the only reason we know that it was an animal rights activist is because of the title of the video. We couldn't hear his message. We didn't know what he was doing. We just know that there was, in this day and age, a white man running on stage. We didn't know what was going to happen. So it's just bad optics. And me being an animal rights activist, and I've been involved with animal rights forever, the conversation was never about animal rights when people were asking me about it, when they read the title of it or found out he was an animal rights activist. It was about the type of people we are. So the comment in the chat around that these actions make us all seem crazy and their supporters are crazy. Optics really matter. They have a ripple effect. So thanks for playing with video 1. Do you want to say something, Jessica, before we move to video 2?
Well, I guess just to put a fine point on what was already said is that, so there's a lot going on here, right? One, he, as it was said, he disrupts the program, no idea what he was saying. He's not doing his cause any favors. It puts a bad first impression on anyone maybe who's new to animal rights. They're like, wow, animal rights people are just off the hook. And then you also have the dynamics in the room of the fact that this white man jumped up on stage and literally took the mic from these women of color who were trying to have a conversation. And so there is what we're talking about, this anti-oppression framework. Not that it may have been better if he weren't a white man, but it may have been better. It doesn't help that he completely disregarded the dynamics and the power structure that was present in the room. So that's another piece of it that we should be aware of when we're talking about anti-oppression framework. Okay, let's do another one.
So again, we're going to play the game, good optics or bad optics. So we're going to watch this video and then kind of do the same process.
going to take us to Twitter here. Lives. Okay.
Need from a candidate?
Well, you got a better deal from me than anybody. I
I'm
just
just
want you
wondering
to go
how we
back and
can
look.
trust you when you've continually broken your pledge not to take fossil fuel money
That is not
and
true.
held fundraisers with the CEO.
I have not.
How
done
about
that.
your climate change advisor, Heather Zykel? She's actually made $1 million from the fossil fuel industry. We need someone we need a Green New Deal, not more corruption.
Thank you for being admiring me so much.
What about your plan doesn't ban fracking? And part of this,
Sorry, one second. All right.
And now back to the game. Good optics or bad optics? Please raise your hand or put in the chat room and we'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands.
Any chats?
Somebody says, excellent, bravo, she was to the point. Oh, we have Mark, have his hand up.
Go ahead,
Mark.
Mark.
Hello, Mark.
Hi. From my perspective, it was bad optics, and from the sense that she never established any connection with the candidate, and the candidate was immediately attacked from his perspective. And I would say, even from my perspective, I thought the candidate or the person doing the talking was basically just coming out and telling him how bad he was, and not listening to what he had to say, even though he was saying I didn't. That's not where I stand. There was no interaction between them. It was all one-way communication. And I don't care who you are, if that's the way a person approaches you, you're going to do kind of what he did and just walk away.
Interesting. Okay. Others?
There's in the chat right now, before we call on someone, they're saying bad for Joe. The activist stayed poised. Somebody agreed with what Mark just said. And then let's see if we want to call on, who else we got?
We got Patricia and Tom. Let's go to Patricia first.
The interviewer came on as an attack mode. I mean, it wasn't like she was asking questions and wanted answers. She was on the attack mode to accuse him of different things and not listening to what he was saying at all.
Okay, let's go to Tom next.
Yeah, hi. I really didn't catch a lot of what she said, so I don't think that she was that clear. I agree with the other two comments, but what I did see is Joe Biden grabbing her hands. Yeah. And based on the recent press that he's gotten around this, I thought that was, something he was trying not to do anymore. But so grabbing someone's hands like that, I thought that was bad optics for him. He should keep his hands to himself, even in that context.
Yeah, thank you.
I got to agree with you there.
Well, see, and I think we put this video in here because it does show the level of nuance that it comes to when we're trying to get a response from a politician when we're bird dogging, and I agree with what everybody's saying is like the optics on her part may have not landed. So the question then becomes, what do we learn from that? What do we need to learn from what we witnessed here in terms of the person doing the bird dogging? And then also weigh it against, is our viewpoint coming from the frame of any oppression? and then just ask ourselves, and that's how we learn and grow. And I also agree that the optics for Joe made it difficult for her, because of the story that we already know about, or that we see about Joe, his relationship with touching and with women, kind of also takes away from whatever she was asking. If you're tuned in to that aspect of Joe Biden, it kind of takes away from there, and that's nothing that she may have not been able to control, because that's just Joe Biden. So this is a great video of, she was, as a focused bird dogger, she was on point in terms of being focused and trying to stay on point and trying to get the question out of her, out of Joe. But there's just so many moving parts to this that it makes a really good video for us to look at and say, if we were going to be her, what would we do differently? Not that she was wrong or right or anything, but just so we can show up in a different light when we do these types of actions. I'll stop there.
Totally. I think it's a really interesting example because it's not actually super straightforward, unlike the one we just saw, which was very clear. I think a little bit of context, this video was taken by the Sunrise Movement. So she's a very young woman, maybe a student, who is doing climate change activism. Joe Biden doesn't have the best record there, you know, and there's a lot of press lately about him being really patronizing, especially to young women, and like being a little overly touchy. So that is definitely happening here. The way to me, it reads as very patronizing of her. And because it was put out by Sunrise, who is known for being young people trying to do climate change work and hold representatives accountable, the sort of underlying thing here is that he's not really, he's dismissive of her in this way, right? And she's trying to get answers. And then there's the other side of the coin, which you're all saying, like she, you know, she didn't flatter him at all. She didn't, she was persistent with her questions, which, to be clear, those things are okay. Sometimes bird dogging requires us to be a little persistent and even a little bit annoying, but that dynamic is very nuanced. So I don't think, there was a lot of press about this after it came out, and a lot of the reflection that I saw about it was that Joe Biden was being patronizing and was not answering her questions about his history of not being really great on issues of fossil fuels. And so, but he did say in the video, you know, thank you for admiring me so much, which is funny because he must have, I don't know if he was being sarcastic or if he thought she was. So there's a lot going on here, but I think, like Jason said, the takeaway is just for us to see that these dynamics really matter. And in terms of like the power dynamics in the room, you've got a young woman and an older man who has a lot of power. And so who looks more sympathetic in this video? And that might depend on who you are also, which is interesting, or who the audience is. And in this case, the audience is not necessarily a crowd of people around them in a room, but the internet. So that's like another factor to consider, because that opens up a can of worms as well.
Yeah. I see that we have a new person with her hand raised, Mary. So I'm going to see if we can bring her in before we move on. And just also to add to what, no, I don't think I need to add, but let's see what Mary has to say.
Go ahead, Mary.
You're currently on mute.
Let's see. All right.
There she goes. If you talk, we can hear you, maybe. Mary. Hello?
Mm-hmm.
You can't. Nope.
Okay. But
if you can't put, was that an echo or was that her? But Mary, if we can't hear you, but if you're able, can you put your question in the chat, and then I'll make sure I'll let it be known. and somebody just put in the chat before we jump into the next one is like, just to clarify, I'm referring to the optics of her message, not the optics of Biden's response. That comes from Tina. Because Tina previously said that I thought it was good optics, clear message with facts one can research. So, and she's clarifying that she's talking about the woman and not Biden. So let's do video number 3 of optics, good or bad.
All right, this one.
This is not biased at all.
No, this is familiar. And this one might start out a little loud, so just a warning. I'm not sure about the sound on this one. Oops.
That's a question.
That's not. Come on.
The sense. That's going the wrong way.
Let's do this. There we go.
Stand up, man. Yeah, right here. Yeah. You're gonna try to go from your right to
So sorry. I don't know what happened there. Let's try that again.
stand up, man. Yeah, right here. Yeah. You're gonna try to go from your right to left and back again.
Good afternoon, Senator Sanders. I would just like you to know that I'm meeting my hero in this moment. I appreciate all the work you've done.
I am a United States Senator, so by definition, I'm a Eugene. And whenever you say nice things to me, my head explodes a little bit more. But what I want to say, I'm going to give it back to you in a second. All right? As we say in our campaign, it ain't about me, it is about us.
Thank you. You know how we can do so. Look at those polls. My question to you, we discussed a lot of different issues today, healthcare, war profiteering, climate change, but I feel like at the heart of all of it is the crisis of money in politics and how corrupting of influence that is. And I support honoring any for Congress because she's just seeking to amend the Constitution, which would make it clear that money is not speech and corporations are not people. Would you consider sponsoring that bill, Senator?
The answer is yes. Here's the issue. And again, I'm proud that over the last 4 years we have begun making progress. But again, and I say this again, not to be boastful, but to be the truth. What this campaign is about is having the guts to look at the real issues facing the American people and attempting to come up with real solutions. Now, this woman raises an issue which is absolutely correct. It's at the center of everything else, and not just climate change. But whether it is climate change, whether it is healthcare.
I would just like you to know that I'm
Okay, so we'll play, and I hear Mark's comment that it was choppy for him, and he couldn't really tell. But let's play optics, good or bad, with this video if you were able to see it. And I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen it before, maybe recall on what you've seen before. Mark Swallow says in the chat, great optics, exclamation point. While we're waiting for hands to be raised for the phone, I would also ask to good or bad, and what made it good or what made it bad when you answer. Also in the chat from Sherry is very good. She engaged him. I'll move my chat so I can see. Engaged him, brought him into her, was not aggressive, and she was on point. Max said, saw it before. When the audio is clear, it's very good. David said, everything's jumping. I couldn't make out the question. Michael says, good optics. She was clear with the question, which brought education to the audience. Bernie answered the question thoroughly. Mark said she developed a rapport with Bernie, introduced the topic in parentheses to educate others, and asked her question. Totally. I'm not seeing any hands for the calls, but I think overall, well, we got one now. Mark Harding just raised his hand. But I think overall, people are agreeing that this is good optics.
Okay, yeah, Mark, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it was kind of an easy thing to approach with this particular candidate, but she did a great job of connecting with the candidate's own platform and approaching it as an advancement in the candidate's platform, even though the candidates never endorsed move to amend. You know, I've heard the video before too, and you know, it is great. But she, like you said, she established rapport. She was very clear on the message of move to amend, and she connected it directly to his candidacy and what he was fighting for in the first place, which made it almost impossible for him to say anything but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like most folks agree it's good optics here. Let me tell you what I like most about this video is that this is Victoria. She's one of our national interns. This is in Chico, where actually both of us are from. And what she did here is she won the room, which is something that we talk about a lot in bird dogging, right? So sometimes I've seen examples of bird dogging where maybe the candidate doesn't really come back with a great answer, but that doesn't always matter if the room agrees with the speaker. So what she did here was make everyone in the room cheer. They said, yes, we agree with you, money and politics. I mean, it was said that it's sort of, it's an easy candidate to do this with, right? Because Bernie talks all the time about corporate power and about money and politics, and she's in a room full of people who likely share those opinions and values. So it was an easy setup, but also she did a great job of sort of bringing the rest of the audience to be on her side, which can happen sometimes even if the candidate is not on your side. And sometimes that means bringing a very compelling story to the introduction. Sometimes that means bringing a really righteous anger to the situation, if that's what it's going to take. It's very nuanced and depends on the candidate and the audience. But this is a good example of why it's awesome to win the room. Because if everyone cheers when she says, we want you to do this, how is someone going to say no to that? Right? So it puts social pressure on him to answer her question the way she wants.
And it sets up the conversation. So if he doesn't follow through, that you're like, this is what the people want. How come you're not listening? It helps carry the narrative. The optics is baked in because anybody watching this will walk away from this video, regardless if they believe in We the People amendment or not. They'll walk away from is like, hey, this is something people care about. So optics definitely won in that on many levels.
Totally. And another thing she did was, you know, she started talking about money and politics, but she also made sure to get in there and corporations are not people, which is a part of the amendment and the solution, as you all well know, that sometimes gets left out. And so that also, maybe there's someone in the audience who is like, yeah, money and politics. But when they hear her say, and corporations are not people, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't know about that. Maybe I should look into that. So the education piece is really good. And even though Bernie has not yet introduced the amendment in the Senate, we have, because of this video, made a lot of progress in that conversation. That takes a long time to get to happen, but there has been progress specifically because of this video. So it can be a really good leverage for us as organizers to go in after this and follow up.
This is what democracy looks like.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, Jason, actually, just back to what we had said at the beginning of the call, you know, democracy is not a noun always. Sometimes it's a verb. And what a cool opportunity to get to be in such close proximity to our elected officials and the people who represent us and tell them what we want them to do and how we want them to do it and engage them and our community in a larger conversation. Like, that's democracy. And so this is a really important practice for us to exercise those muscles because as we build this society that is accountable, it's going to require us to participate in this very real and direct way.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I was sending you a message. So now that we've had fun playing the game, optics, good or bad, and knowing the journey that we've gone through together on this thing, we want to open it up for questions that go beyond the videos to see if there's any clarifying questions that you have, that of anything that we've covered so far tonight. And we'll do that by raising your hand, and we'll call on you. Also reading in the chat, and we'll give space to it. It looks like Tom got his hand up.
Okay, let's see. Tom, go ahead. Oh. Tom, you might be muted on your end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I was just thinking that I think good optics, it also takes a lot of practice. I think it's difficult to remain poised when you're standing up and when maybe you are face to face with the politician, or you're speaking to a large audience and that's not something you're used to. So I think maybe this also takes practice and something you'd want to like rehearse on your own time and kind of make sure that you have your, talking points or your narrative down.
Absolutely.
And with that, I absolutely 100% agree with you. And we were going to say this for the end of the call for your takeaway, but I think it's a good transition for what you're saying is like the recognition that we may not view ourselves as individuals as great speakers. And so what is the prep work, outside of, or actually in addition to the anti-impression framework and understanding optics, what is the prep work that we need to do so we're comfortable? And it's okay to take a document up and read the document. Nobody's going to look at you and hope not. There may be somebody, but who cares about that one person? But for the most part, people are not going to judge you because you're nervous or are reading from a document. So what I'm putting in the chat room right now, and we'll send this again after the call with the recording of the call, is a worksheet that Jessica and I put together that will help frame your questions, that will help frame getting focused on what you want to say during your bird dogging. We call it elements for an effective question. And just to do a really quick overview of it, the worksheet just is really building the question. Is like begin with thanking and acknowledging the candidate for something that they've done that you think is good or has potential to be good. Follow that by including your personal story or statement of how it relates to you, and kind of makes that connection between you and that candidate. It's like, look, we are, in the same boat. We want the same goodness in the world, kind of thing. Segue from that to incorporate how corporate power keeps you away from creating that world that you want. Do a quick educational line element so you can help educate the audience and educate the candidate if they are not aware of it. And then finish with a clear and direct ask. And I know I'm saying a lot here, but in that document, you'll see it on the page 2, there's a section for you to identify what I want to thank and acknowledge. What is my personal statement? What is my segue to corporate power? What am I going to say about educating the room and the candidate about we the people amendment? And then what is my direct ask? So we want to share that with you so you can play with that in this conversation. But I'll stop there and share that. We'll circle back around and touch it. I want to go back to the questions. We have Mark in the chat saying, what about one, writing your question down / approach down? What about having someone film the question? Should we be strongly assertive about getting called upon? What about wearing MTA clothing, pins, signs in the town hall? So there's multiple questions, and I'll tease it out if Jessica wants to speak to them. First question is like, what about writing your question approach down. I think we talked about that just now with that worksheet. What about having somebody film the question?
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and plug that we do have 2 previous webinars about like the very basics of how to set all this up. Definitely, it's super important to have someone film your question. That is like key, because like we said, there might be 100 people in the room with you, but when you get it on film, then your audience is kind of infinite. So definitely that's important. It's totally okay to write your question down. In fact, sometimes that can even make you look a little bit sympathetic, because like maybe someone is like, oh, I would be scared to ask a question. I would need to write it down too. And then that, you know, that's totally fine. What were the other questions?
The other question was, should we be strongly assertive about getting called upon?
The answer is yeah. Unfortunately, it's really hard to get your question asked. So like we say in the other webinars, if you go to movetoamend.org/webinars, there's 2 others there that talk more explicitly about this and how to get your question asked. But you want to sit close to the front. You want to spread out, bring a crew with you and kind of spread out in the first couple of rows. Raise your hand first, fast, and high. So make sure you're the first one to have your hand in the air, get it up and make sure they can see you right away so that they know to call on you. And then I think there was a question in there about wearing Move to Amend gear.
Yep.
Yeah, actually not a good idea to wear your Move to Amend gear usually, because unless your organization is sponsoring the event that's being put on, if you show up looking like an activist, they're gonna sort of know that you might be there to confront them in some way or to ask. Generally, it looks better if you show up looking like a supporter. So, you know, just looking like somebody who's there to learn more about the candidate so that they don't necessarily know you're there with an agenda.
Excellent. And then somebody said, can you send this link out to us via email? Yes, we can, and we will after the call. I want to be acknowledging of the time. We are right at time for the end of the call. I want to make sure we get this last comment that's in the chat out, and then we'll start wrapping it up. And if there's any questions, or if you want to explore something, you can reach out to me or Jessica after the call, and we'll take care of it off this call. So the last comment is from Mark. It says, I attended a town hall with my U.S. Senator last Sunday. Unfortunately, he didn't attend. So since he is up for re-election in 2020, the other candidates for his seat did attend. I said that an amendment has been raised in the House to address political money with cross-party support, and then asked the candidates if they would support such an amendment in the Senate. But this session has excellent in helping me do better job at framing my questions correctly. So I think what he's saying is this session, yeah, got it. Thank you.
I'm so glad.
And thanks for sharing your story.
Totally, I'm so glad you did that, and that probably looks pretty bad for that incumbent. And I will also say, when I send out the link to this webinar, I will make sure to include the links to the past webinars that have a little bit more detail about like how to get your questions asked and all of that. And then of course, we'll also include the worksheet.
Great. You want to close this out?
Sure. I just want to say thank you so much for being here, and thank you. I know sometimes bird dogging seems a little overwhelming. This is a lot of information. I don't want this to discourage you from just going for it too, right? There's a way that we can do this with a lot of intention and nuance, and I think all of that is very important, and you can totally do this. And you don't need to plan for a year to ask the perfect question. It's going to take practice. And you have an idea of what looks really bad, and you have an idea of what looks really good, and one that's kind of in the middle. And so I just want to encourage you to like practice and try, and try to keep these things in mind as you go about it. And if you have any questions, Jessica at movetoamend.org, Jason at movetoamend.org, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. We can talk on the phone. We really want people to be out there bird dogging this election cycle, so we can help support that. Jason?
I will just add, yes, please, if you have questions, everything Jessica just said. And I want to thank everyone who was on this call tonight and your participation and your engagement with this topic. I had a lot of fun with you on this call, so thank you for allowing me the space to explore this process and this journey with you. And the good news is that the direct ask within this framework is always going to be the easiest because it's always related to the We the People amendment, and the story that you make up is one that comes from your heart. You'll win the audience and the candidate. So thank you, and until the next time, have a great night, morning, evening, wherever you're at.
Night, everybody. Thank you.